Welcome to the Published Author Podcast, where we help entrepreneurs learn how to write a book and leverage it to grow their business and make an impact. I'm your host, Josh Steimle. Today, our guest is Marcus Whitney. Marcus is a founding partner of Jumpstart Health Investors, a venture capital firm focused on the healthcare space with a portfolio of over 100 companies. But before he became a successful entrepreneur, he was a college dropout and worked as a waiter. Marcus now has been featured in outlets like Inc., TechCrunch, Fast Company, and The Atlantic, and he's the author of the best-selling book, Create and Orchestrate, about claiming your creative power through entrepreneurship. Marcus is also the producer and host of Marcus Whitney Live, a live stream interview show, and Marcus Whitney's Audio Universe, a podcast. Marcus is also co-founder and part owner of a Major League Soccer team, the Nashville Soccer Club. Marcus is also a member of the board of the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum, the Nashville Convention and Visitors Corporation, Instruction Partners, and an arts commissioner for the city of Nashville. That's a mouthful. Marcus, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
All right, so let's get your life story out here a bit, because you've got a lot of impressive accomplishments, and we, of course, want to talk about your book and what happened to motivate that. But where did you grow up? Who are you? And how did you end up being a venture capitalist, an entrepreneur, and doing all this stuff?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, a neighborhood inside of Brooklyn called East Flatbush, affectionately referred to as a two-fare zone because there's no subway anywhere close to where my house is. So generally speaking, I took the bus to get most places. And I grew up there until I graduated high school and left for college. So it was a great place to be raised because, you know, so diverse, and New York, obviously, in so many ways, center of art, fashion, music, business, so many other things. So I got to, you know, be influenced by all of those things. I was really into sports growing up. I was a wrestler, sort of state champ, wrestler in high school, and really loved sports. And it was just a great place to grow up. My parents, stayed together, and I had a great upbringing. And Brooklyn was sort of a big part of who I am today. I now live in Nashville, and I've been here for 20 years. And when I moved here in the year 2000, Nashville was not what it is today. It was just at the inflection point and starting to become what it is today. They had just cleaned up downtown Nashville, had just brought two professional sports franchises to town, the Tennessee Titans, which used to be the Houston Oilers, and also the Nashville Predators, a Nashville hockey team in the Southeast United States, which are sort of like crazy, outside of, Tampa Bay. And so, it was the beginning of something great, but it was still very, very much a town, not really a city yet.
Now, why were you even looking at Nashville? Being from New York, how do you end up saying, I think I'm going to move to Tennessee?
Yeah, so it really was the wandering part of my life, which I basically consider from 17 to 24. There was a 7-year window of wandering that started with me going to the University of Virginia. And instead of focusing on architecture, which was what I was there to do, I focused on hip hop and hanging out. And that led me to dropping out in my junior year. I continued to pursue hip hop as what I thought would be a career, but it was really just, I preferred to have fun with my friends than to actually take life, seriously. Moved to Northern Virginia for a little while, waited tables and continued to record music. Went back home to New York for a short spell with my tail between my legs, and realized I needed to kind of get my life together.
So you were kind of finding yourself during this time.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. And then also realized I really couldn't stay home. You know what I mean? Like my parents were like frustrated with me, and I just didn't want to be there in the middle of that. And I had also kind of started to really like the South from the time that I was down in Virginia. So
yeah, I was going to ask, how did your parents feel about this? And did you have siblings, and what were they doing?
Well, all my siblings were older. I'm the baby of the family, and so and my siblings are much older. I was kind of an only child in a lot of ways, I think everyone was just sort of like, one day he'll get his head on straight. Like right now, I think everyone just sort of knew that I was finding myself, and nobody gave me too much of a hard time about it. But I think they all were probably shaking their head a bunch when they were asking, like, what is he doing? You know what I mean?
My parents may have asked the same questions. I'm the youngest by 7 years in my family too. So I can relate to what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's kind of a weird thing. And I moved down to Atlanta. I was down there for 3 years. That was where I met my ex-wife, but it's where I started my family. And that was the beginning of the end of the wandering years. We moved from Atlanta to Nashville because she spent her high school years in Nashville and had a best friend here and some familiarity and some affinity for the city. I didn't know anything about it, had never been here before, but was still sort of in that young, I'll pick up and move anywhere, part of my life. And when I got here, everything, I think, really started to get serious. We got here, we were living in a week-to-week motel. I was able to very quickly get 2 jobs as a waiter. And so, was able to pay for food and roof over our heads, but had 1 kid, another one on the way. And, I don't know, getting here and sort of being completely out of my element and just working 6.5 days a week, it really just pretty much grounded me into this reality. Okay, I'm a full-blown adult now. Whatever I thought I was doing as a kid is over. I now have kids I have to take care of. And it just sort of anchored me into really making progress professionally. And so I taught myself how to code, just buying books and practicing at home over an 8-month period. And I got my first job as a junior software developer the day after my second son was born in April of 2021. And so that's kind of the beginning of, my true adult life.
So April 2001, you got your first job as a programmer, right?
Yes. Yes.
So this is right when the dot-com crash is happening and all these tech companies are going out of business. So perfect timing, right?
Yes, perfect timing. Actually, the company that I went to work for, a company called HealthStream, I don't think this is urban legend. I think it's true. I think they were the last IPO before the bust.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, I got there. Thankfully, they were making real money. They were a healthcare education technology company. So they were making real money. So even
they actually had a business. They actually had something people wanted to buy. Unlike so many other companies back then.
It's so funny how I just take that for granted, because I could have wound up in, a pets.com, right? But I was in a real company that actually had real customers and real value, and was able to keep that job, and then develop my career over the next 7 years, sort of moving closer and closer towards being in a startup. Eventually 2003, I was the 5th employee at an email marketing company called Emma, and built that technology platform out, built out a team. So I learned how to become a manager, earned some equity. So I learned what that was all about. And that was like my first success in the startup world, and kind of never looked back from that point. Really, got bit by the startup bug while I was there.
Oh, that's cool. So what was the next step after that? You're now working in a startup. Now, were you doing the coding, or were you more like the founder of this?
So I was in between, right? I was not the founder. The company had been alive for a year. They had built the first version of the software that was effectively a prototype. I mean, it worked, but when I got there, it was like kind of falling down on top of itself. They couldn't get mail out the door. And so the first 6 months I was there, I spent engaged in a full-on rewrite, sort of under the gun, kind of a, save the company kind of moment. And I think coming out on the other side of that was when, they said, okay, we're going to build a team underneath you now and grant you some equity and sort of all that stuff. So I was not a founder, but I was a very early partner, and I started as a coder, and by the end I was writing no code. I was leading a team, and so it was a big maturation process for me professionally. 2007, I left to start my first business, which was just a development agency, and it was a big shift in my life because I left the company, and then two months later, my wife and I got separated. And so there was this whole sort of life change happening. My parents had moved down to Nashville, from New York, just so they retired. So it's really massive, shift in life on a bunch of different fronts. And I was starting a business, and also, 2007, 2008, it was the recession was happening. So tons of life activity happening at that time. But the business did well. I was able to build a 10-person team. We got over $1 million in revenue. And that was really the beginning of me, realizing I wanted to be on this path of being an entrepreneur for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm. Well, that takes some commitment, because I've run a marketing agency for 20 years, and we started out as a development shop. And one of my mentors, he sat me down when I was leaving his company to start it. And he's like, "Don't do this. You will hate this business. Clients are the worst." He's like, "It's not scalable. Like, you'll lose so much money." And I was like, "No, I'm going to do this. This will be great." And now I look back, and sometimes I'm like, he kind of knew what he was talking about. I still love it. I love this business, but yeah, he had some good points there too.
Oh yeah. I mean, for me, I didn't stay in it long, because I fell prey to, one of many mistakes you can make. And I write about it in the book, concentration risk. I had the one client that just kept growing and raising money and eating up more of my resources. And then next thing I knew, like, I was working for them. You know what I mean? And
they end up being 80% of your revenue. And then you're like, wait a second, now I just have a job.
That's right. And it was also like the beginning of me understanding just how much there was to this whole entrepreneur thing. I never really had proper mentorship and certainly not training in how to run a business. I left Emma, the email marketing company where I was head of technology. I left because, I wanted what they had, which was I wanted to be the boss. I wanted to be on those walks that they took that no one else got to be privy to, where they were making all the decisions. And, I wanted all those things. And then, when I got there to where I was running the show, I just realized, oh my God, the level of responsibility and challenge and difficulty is so much greater than I ever anticipated.
Yeah, and you're thinking, I'm going to get rid of my boss. And then you realize, wait, now I have 50 bosses.
Yes.
They all think they're the only boss.
Yes. And no one is looking out for me. You know what I mean? And so it was really the beginning of me. It was probably the beginning of the book for me, because going through that process, I started to just realize, wow, this is incredibly difficult, and it's multidimensional what it means to run a business. There were huge gaps in my understanding around basic things like finance. Like, I remember, I'm hiring a team and I'm doing payroll, and like, I didn't know what payroll taxes were, and so like my budgets were totally blown. Because I literally just didn't even project payroll taxes. And then, halfway through the year, my accountant was like, so
you've got like a couple $100,000 saved somewhere, right? Right. And you're like, wait, what?
Exactly. And the lesson and the hits kept coming, man. Those kinds of lessons kept on coming. And I started to just get this sense that I was going to be learning these lessons for a long time. They were going to be hard. They were going to hurt. But I was learning and I was growing, and I was, getting that real world MBA people talk about. And so I ended up having to fold that company into a venture-backed startup. So I was not an entrepreneur for about 4 years. Again, I was back into a job situation, but nights and weekends on the side, I was working on a tech accelerator, which laid the foundation for what I do today in venture capital. It was right, Techstars had launched in 2007, Y Combinator in 2005. So in 2009, when my agency sort of folded into this other company that was originally my client, I started working on Jumpstart Foundry with my partner Vic Gatto, who was a venture capitalist for over a decade. And we were running this tech accelerator nights and weekends, which kind of let me still feel like I had a little bit of an entrepreneurial edge to things. Mm-hmm. And over the course of 4 years, as the venture-backed company didn't do so well, our accelerator did well, and it gave me a great foundation to start being in the venture capital business. So in 2014, I left that company and I went in full time as a co-partner in Jumpstart Foundry, and we changed to a healthcare early stage pre-seed venture capital fund. I've been doing that for the last 6+ years. We now by the end of this year we'll have over 100 million in assets and management, over 100 portfolio companies, and it's been great. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks so much for telling that story. So now let's get to the book. Where did the book come in? At what point did you say, I need to write a book about this, or I want to write a book? Was this a dream you had always had to write a book, or was it an idea that somebody planted, or how did it come about?
No, it really hit right as I made the transition into full-time venture capital, because I was now talking to all these entrepreneurs. I was seeing all these blind spots that I knew from experience that they didn't see yet, that they didn't know. And I had also spent a lot of time studying a lot of the emerging or leading thought leadership works in entrepreneurship. Steve Blank's customer development, process and theory, Eric Ries's Lean Startup, the business model canvas and business model generation book by Strategizer. So I was reading all these things, and they were all really cool. And I don't want to say that they were academic, because they weren't, but they sort of covered, okay, like, how do you take something from a hypothesis to a real business? None of them covered like how you run a business, like what it is, what the day-to-day blocking, tackling, fist fighting aspect of running a business really is. And what are the aspects of your own personality that will get in the way? And, how do you deal with the mindset, challenges that come with it? I didn't see that book. And I especially didn't see that book in the, in the growing canon of startup venture capital, works that were out there. And so I sort of just was like, I want to start writing that book. So what I did was 2015, I initiated a Kickstarter, because I was like, I know I want to do it, but do other people want this book? If they do, then I'll set out on the process of writing it. Mm-hmm. So we got a Kickstarter across the line, a little over $30,000 in backers, and close to 400 backers. And then I was like, okay, here we go. Let's start to write the book. And then started the very, very long process of figuring out that I had no idea how to write a book, and how difficult it is to write a book.
It's like starting a business, isn't it?
It is like starting a business. And so that's what I've been doing the last 5 years. I did that Kickstarter in 2015. I published the book in 2020. It took me 5 years to put the book together. And, some of that was the process of learning how to write a book. Some of that was I hadn't learned all the lessons that the book required yet. And I still had some living to do to sort of get it all done. So I did things like I wrote a newsletter, every week, for the backers, and did other things. Like, it was part of why I initiated a podcast, to kind of create additional value while I was in this process, of putting the book together, because I just did not want to put out a bad book. I didn't think, okay, it's my first book, I'm going to do like an absolutely great book. But I was like, I want to do a very, very good book, and I knew I would keep looking at it and reading it, and just like, this is not a very good book yet, So it took me 5 years to get to something that, every time I look at it, I'm like, okay, mission accomplished. That was worth the backers' investment in me.
I've been in that same boat with you. I did a crowdfunding campaign as well. And yeah, you get the money up front, and then you're like, well, now I'm committed. I'm going to do this book, and it'll be done in 6 months. And then in 6 months, you're like, uh-oh, I don't have the book, and I've got all these people who paid me for it. I got to give them something. And so you start coming up with all ideas, and I launched a course, and yeah, you start doing all this stuff to give them value, anything but actually finishing the book.
That's right. And there's, when I did the Kickstarter, the thing I didn't know was that I was not an author. I had to become an author. I had to evolve and develop, and I had to, I guess the book is probably 54 or so thousand words or whatever. And you know this. I mean, I wrote probably 150,000 words to get to the 54,000 that are in the book, right? And so it's sort of this weird combination of anything but finish the book, but at the same time, there is this process of, if you don't want to put out a piece of junk, you do have to get the reps in, and you do have to learn how to structure a book. You do have to learn how to write compelling chapters. You have to learn that stuff. And I don't know if I was fast or slow in that process, but I know I am an author now. Mm-hmm. I am an author today. I was not an author when I set out to do this thing.
Yeah. Or I might say you were always an author, but you weren't necessarily a writer. I mean, there's a difference between, just because you write something doesn't make you a writer. There are people out there who are professional writers and they know that craft and they know how to do it. And that doesn't mean that you can't write a book if you're not a writer, but it does make it harder if you're not a professional writer. At any point, did you ever?
I love that.
Did you ever think about hiring a ghostwriter or somebody else to help you with it and just do it for you, and you could just speak to them or something?
So many times, and I was so disgusted by the thought, because and when I look at this book that has like my face on it, right? Like I know what it was that disgusted me about the thought, right? It's that I wanted this moment where, when I'm talking to somebody, I'm like, you know what, I'm going to send you a copy of the book, and I write, a little note to them, and I package it up and I send the book to them. I'm sending them 5 years, really probably 20 plus years of my life, right? But they're my words. They're my words. You know what I mean? And yes, there was a professional editor, thank God. But they're not ghostwritten. I'm giving them all of that effort and all of that pain to arrive at this product. So I know people who got their books out faster than I did by using the ghostwriter thing. But I don't think on the other side of it, you can say you're a writer. I'm so proud to be able to say I am a writer, and to know I now have that skill, and I've used it. I mean, I wrote an open letter last June that resulted in a new fund that I'm raising. And it's really the quality of the writing is what did it. Not that I just decided that I wanted to do it. It's the quality of the writing. So you
felt that sense of ownership and you wanted it to be 100% or as close to 100% yours.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit more about your process. You said you were writing newsletters, you were creating other content that you knew you could put in the book. You were finding ways to get it out there. How did it start to come together? Like, did you make a lot of progress at first and then you had to backtrack, or did you start with an outline, or did you just start writing stuff down? Like, what was your process like of building this book, architecting this book?
Yeah, so the first 5 months were just me out in the wilderness writing these things, and it was mostly brain dumping. It was not writing. It was like me getting the ideas out of my head, and I'm writing these words, but they have no structure. You know what I mean? There's no structure to it. At a certain point, I realized I don't know how to write a book. And so I actually hired a writer to help me frame the book. And what she did was she taught me how to structure the book, where, it starts and it's got kind of a spine. She taught me what the spine of a book was. She taught me how to like ramp into it and then how to like descend and get to the end. She taught me how to set up structure for chapters. Like, okay, every chapter is going to be X amount of words and it's going to have this, this, and this. And you can of course move away from that, but having that structure helps you to get through it. And then you can say, okay, in these 2 chapters of these 12, I want to move away from that a little bit. But for the most part, all the chapters will have this structure to it. And it actually helps the reader because they start to kind of get used to your structure and they say, okay, now I know how to navigate the book and I know how to like digest the book, right? So she taught me that, and she helped me to come up with the version 1 of the table of contents that, with the exception of a few tweaks, was the final table of contents, from a chapter listing perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went on another sprint of writing, and was able to deliver some of the chapters reasonably well, others just not at all. And then I just stopped because I was going through some difficult things business-wise, and I actually had a serious bout of imposter syndrome. And so I just sort of stopped for probably like 11 months, just like didn't write the book. Got to the other side of that and then reapproached it and said, you know what, I have to like get out of this space completely. And so I rented a cabin about an hour and a half away from my house for a week. And I went to this cabin and I did not leave. Like I didn't go on like hikes and, fishing. I just went and locked myself in this room.
It's interesting how common this story is with authors, that they're like, at some point I just had to get away. Matthew McConaughey I was listening to an interview about his book, Green Lights, and he was saying this is what he did. He went out in the wilderness, disconnected for 2 weeks, and just got it all out.
Yeah. Yeah. And it works. It works. I mean, I came out on the other side of that, and I probably had the alpha of the book, the proper alpha of the book. And that was probably December of 2018. And then it was a year of kind of refining that. And I probably rewrote 1 or 2 of the chapters. And then I was like, okay, this is as far as I can take it. And I don't have a publisher. So now I got to figure out how I'm actually going to get this thing to the next level. I was on a Facebook group called Write and Rant that a friend of mine, Mitch Joel, runs. And that was when I first heard about Scribe Media, and ended up, working with them. And that was when I got editing and professional book design and all of that other kind of stuff. Right. And that took it from where it was to the final, piece. So that's, that was my process. Got it live June of last year. Obviously that was also crazy because, there's no book tour, there's no public speaking because of COVID-19. So I actually was able to slip in a letter that acknowledged that, hey, I have no idea what the world is going to look like, because of COVID-19, but I still think entrepreneurship is going to be really, really important. So I hope that this book is helpful, in whatever we're going to do to rebuild the world. I am so grateful for the way that everything turned out. It was very painful to go through it, especially in those periods of inactivity or insecurity, but the quality of the product, and I actually even think the timing were better than I could have planned for, in the beginning.
So what was it like working with Scribe Media? They're very well known in the industry. You're the first author I've interviewed who's worked with them. So I'm curious to hear more about how you found them, why you chose to work with them, and what that experience was like. Yeah.
So the post, and I think it was Mitch who posted the thing about Scribe. Mitch is just someone who I trust. He's he's sort of, a legend in the digital media space. And he posted something very, very favorable about them. And I don't even think it was because he had worked with them. I think it was because he knew Tucker Max and, just really appreciated the company. So I went and checked it out, and, I signed up for an intro call, and I just thought that, for what they were offering, it really hit all of the points that I needed for where I was, right? Which was, I've got this really solid manuscript that is rough. It needs a real copy editing pass. What I found out was it needed a real editing pass, not just copy editing, but a real editing pass. It needed to be edited. And then there was all these other things that I just didn't want to deal with. And then there were things I didn't even know about, in the book publishing process. And so I feel that I got to have the experience that I would have had I worked with a top tier publisher for whom you would get a book deal with, except I paid them to do the work and I own the book 100%. So, for me, it was a really good deal. You
might have actually had a better experience than you would have had with a traditional publisher.
That's, I can't compare through my own personal experience, but I have been, I've talked to people who are talking about self-publishing, and I've said, listen, they're not the cheapest option out there, but if you have the budget for it, it is an exceptional experience. They do a fantastic job with project management. The quality is very, very high, and it will improve the end product you put out in the world, which is probably one of the most important things. Is without them, I really don't believe I would be as proud of this product as I am. I feel like I would put this book up against, any business book that, Simon & Schuster, Penguin, or any of those folks have put out. I mean, I think it's that good. And I think they have a lot to do with that. What they brought to the table is a big part of that.
Cool. Awesome. So then what has the reception been like? The book's out there, people are reading it, people are buying it. How's that going?
Better than I could have hoped for. It's been fantastic. The book is this combination of me telling the story of the last 20 years of my life, which in and of itself, I just shared some with you and with your listeners. So, it's a bit of a novel story, college dropout, waiting tables, new town, and then fast forward on the other side of it, it's healthcare venture capitalist and pro sports team owner. So it's a bit of a novel story. There's not a million stories like that are out there. Then but along the way, a lot of it is me talking about failures, because the failures were when I got the biggest lessons, and so I made a point, and I don't think I would have been willing. This is another thing about the time that I took to write the book. I would say in the first 2.5 years that I was working on the book, I don't think I was in a headspace where I would have been as willing to talk about the failures. And I think I turned the corner in about year 3, where I was like, no, the failures are the thing. Like, that's the thing that's going to make the book great, is when I am honest about it. And so I talk quite a bit about failures. Several chapters. Every chapter, with the exception of 2, really start with a story, and many of the chapters start with a failure story. And the big lesson that comes out of it then sets up me talking about either my philosophy or actual information that I'm trying to impart on this person, with the idea you don't want to make this mistake if you don't have to, right? So here's some of my philosophies around this that I've learned through this experience, or here's some real information that can help you avoid making that mistake. So, people who have never started a business, as well as people who, I was even talking to somebody yesterday who has been in business for themselves for, the last 5 years. But there's a particular chapter that I wrote on venture capital where she was like, that was so helpful, because like, you demystified this thing that is so mystical, and I couldn't really tell how it worked and whether or not it was for me or should I be considering it. And you just like totally broke it down. So people have responded incredibly well to it. I haven't done any tricks to kind of get reviews, and the Amazon reviews are, averaging, I think, 4.9 stars, over 100 at this point. So yeah, the response has been really, really great. And it's just great to have this body of work now that can sort of take the place of mentoring sessions. I mean, it's better than most mentoring sessions I could offer to somebody in a 30-minute window, and so I love that about it.
Right, because you've concentrated all the experience and knowledge and stories and everything into this well-polished book that you can hand out to people, which saves you hours and hours of time, because otherwise you'd have to sit down with every single startup that you invest in and explain it all over again, right? That's
right. That's exactly right.
So during those 5 years that you were working on the book, were you ever concerned that somebody was going to come out with that book that you were writing, or something that would kind of compete with it and take the wind out of your sails and make you feel like, well, now they wrote it and they kind of covered this?
What a great question. I have to say that there are probably aspects of the book, there are probably chapters within the book that I had those concerns about, but as a total package, no. I was, and I think that's because I knew that a portion of the book was going to be my story, and I knew enough about my story to know it's relatively unique. And that's kind of been how I've that's been the direction I've taken as an entrepreneur, certainly over the last 5 years. Is I have a chapter in the book that's called "Different is Better Than Better." And what all I really mean by that is each one of us are uniquely qualified in something to do something, and the more that you can lean into that and concentrate on that, the more you won't have to worry about being in a crowded market, and so, yeah, that was never really a big concern of mine. I was much more afraid that I wouldn't get the thing done. That was the real fear, not that someone else was going to come out and steal the thunder of the book.
Yeah. Were there other books that, like you said, there was no book out there that did what you wanted your book to do, but were there other books that you used as kind of a guide or a template, or sometimes I call them your hero book? It's that book that you look at and say, I want to write this book, but different in these ways. Were there any other books that you looked towards as kind of mentoring you along the process of creating your own book?
Yes. And it was inspiring in a muse way more than I want to write this book, but with this different change. So the 4-Hour Work Week for me is an incredible book because of the execution, not even because of like what's in it. But the execution of the book is just remarkable, I think. And what it did for Tim Ferriss's life, and it is so counterintuitive, and it's so irreverent, and it just was really, and I don't think I achieved the same level of those two characteristics that he did, partially because it wasn't my objective, but I love the way that he structured the book and the way that he had no problem slaughtering sacred cows, and that he did give me the courage in parts of the book where I did get a little concerned about, what will people think? Like in the very first chapter, I kind of go after higher education, and now obviously, in a COVID-19 world, everyone's like really putting a strong lens at higher education. But I am making a fundamental argument that entrepreneurship is the great equalizer of our era, not education, unfortunately. And it's really just because of the way that education has evolved as an industry. It's predatory, quite frankly. But you can't justify. Generally speaking, you cannot justify the ROI for the average American family in higher education. You just can't do it anymore. And the way that he went after many of the conventions of the business world in that book, it was that I admired that. I admired that, and I aspired to bring that same spirit into this book. I wanted this book to be a book that if somebody read it who did not, prior to reading it, have a solid understanding of the business world, that they would after reading it. Because what I was trying to do was say, the business world puts up a lot of smoke signals and screens, but it's actually not that complicated. And if you read this book, and in particular, if you read the spine of the book, the middle of it, the 8 core concepts, you will understand 100% of the businesses you're looking at, 100%. And you'll be able to have conversations with people who are in business about those businesses with the information in this, right in the middle of this book. So that kind of irreverence I was very much, trying to emulate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I read The 4-Hour Workweek pretty soon after it came out. And I remember I read a lot. I've always read a lot. I love reading, and I've always loved reading business books. And I remember reading that and thinking, this is the first business book I can actually use, because I had read Good to Great and everything. And Good to Great is a great book. It's really interesting, but you put it down and it's kind of like, well, what do I actually do with this? I mean, it's cool, but how do I go into the office tomorrow and change something? I read The 4-Hour Workweek. I was like, I got a list of like 100 things I can actually do in my business tomorrow to change things. It was so practical. There aren't that many books out there. I mean, like that. I mean, there's the E-Myth is kind of another one that I say there's some good practical stuff in there, and some of Steve Blank's stuff and Eric Ries, some of that stuff's practical. I think one of my favorites that, as you're talking about your book, this keeps coming up for me, is Ben Horowitz's The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Yes.
Have you read that one?
I have read it, and it definitely would also be in the books that have inspired me. Yes.
Yeah. I'm reading his second one right now, the What You Do Is Who You Are. Have you read that one yet?
No, I haven't.
That's a great one. It's all about culture. It repeats some of the stuff from The Hard Things, but there's a lot of new stuff, and it's just more focused on culture. It's equally great. It's a great book, but it's all about instilling the culture in your business. So your book's out there now. You finished it, 5 years. Maybe it's a little bit too soon for me to ask you this question, but do you have any ideas for a next book? Do you think you'll write another book someday?
I feel that I'm getting very close to committing to another book, but I'm not quite there yet. And it's because COVID-19 has somewhat interrupted what this book can be. And every day I'm coming more into a commitment to making sure that I fully respect what this book is. And I don't think I've done that yet. The last 6 months, it's like I launched this book and I spent maybe 60 days doing the best I could in a virtual only world promoting it. And then I pretty quickly went to raising another fund. And so I have not done this book justice yet. And so I owe it to the book to do that. Mm-hmm. And I need to kind of think about what that looks like and what that is. But I still have to do that. So I'm not yet committed to the second book, but I have a pretty good sense of where I'm going with it. I have a pretty good sense of where I'm going with the next book. And it would be thematically the right next book to do after this one.
Cool. Can you give us any more of a sneak peek into it?
I can. Yeah, I can. The thing that got me across the line with this book was actually, it's kind of like where both Tim Ferriss and Ben Horowitz went with their next book, right? Which is more of sort of an internal thing. This is more of an external book. This first one, it's about business and terms and interactions and leadership and things like that. But what really got this book done was me starting to really focus on taking care of myself. Over the course of the 20 years, and all the progress and the accomplishments and the failures, as I've talked about, there was a lot of pressure and a lot of fear and a lot of trauma and a lot of bad habits that were developed. And I had to take a bit of a break to just acknowledge that and work through that. And that meant therapy, and it meant sobriety, and it meant meditation, and it meant really thinking about nutrition, and it meant paying attention to getting at least 7 hours sleep a night, or at least on average. Some nights it's 8.5, some nights 6, but I want to average in that 7+ range. And I've been doing that for over 2 years now consistently. And what I've now found is that the level of my performance as an entrepreneur is significantly better. I'm more competitive. and I don't just mean the spirit of competitive. I mean literally the work product, the quality, the execution. I'm more of a problem now. You know what I mean? And so I'm thinking about that integration of, who you are is what you do, and the fact that business is fundamentally you brought it up when you were talking about, was I afraid of somebody else coming out there? The business exists in a market, and the market is competitive. And, it is hard to think of something that truly exists in an explicit format of a competition, where you wouldn't expect people to focus on their sleep and exercise and diet, anything athletic, but not just athletics, right? You know what I mean? There's other forms of competition where you can't just be a mess. You know what I mean? But for some reason in the business world, it's like happy hours and all-nighters and all this nonsense. And it's not real, And so the next book is directionally there.
Yeah, it is crazy, because I went through that period where I thought, coming out of the dot-com crash, I thought, if you want to be successful, you've got to work 100-hour weeks. You got to sleep on the office floor. Everything is about the business. That's where all your time goes. And so I was working 6 days a week. I was missing family reunions, weddings, all that stuff. And I was a wreck, and the business was a wreck.
Yeah.
And now I look back and I'm like, what was I thinking? You wouldn't look at an athlete and say, well, gee, if they work out 6 hours a day, then they should work out 18 hours a day, because then they'll be that much better. It's like, no, that their body would tear down and fall apart, and they'd be a mess. And yet, like you're saying, somehow we think that entrepreneurs can push themselves 18 hours a day, and they're going to get more done than if they do 8 hours a day of reasonable work. And yeah, my own experience too is when I backed off, I got so much more done. So then I backed off more, and I got more done.
More done.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the book I want to write. Right. Is the book that reflects that experience that you've had, and the experience that I've had, and more and more entrepreneurs that I know are either seeking or starting to find themselves.
Yeah, I think a lot of us who are in our 40s and 50s understand this because we've been through it and we've wised up. But there's still this group coming up in their 20s and 30s who are going through it, and they're thinking they're just where we were, and they need that book.
I hope so. So I think that'll be the next one, and I hope that all the pain that I went through to become a writer will make this next one easier. But like I said, I'm not fully committed to it yet, because this first one deserves a little bit more than I've given it.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that sneak peek with us. And Marcus, thanks so much for being with us here today on the Published Author Podcast, and for sharing these insights and your story and your journey as an author. Where can people learn about you and follow you and connect with you?
MarcusWhitney.com is that's my website, and you can just sign up there. I am at the moment on a little bit of a hiatus from all things online. I have, if you look at my socials, they've been kind of dead for a minute, just because the world is kind of a crazy place, and I'm trying to control the inputs and control the energy. And like I said, I've been working on this fund, but if you subscribe there, I promise you, when I do reemerge and I give this book the proper platform that it deserves, and I start to use my voice again, that's where you'll find me. So the best place is to start with my website, MarcusWhitney.com.
All right. Thanks so much for being with us here today, Marcus.
Thanks, Josh, for having me.
I didn't want to talk too much about myself on this because it's all about you, but all your experiences, I was like, this is exactly what I went through. This is exactly me. Like every step of the way, I'm like, oh, that too. But it was funny, like even stuff like where you're like, I'm the youngest child and we're far apart. I'm like, hey, me too. And, but there were so many things with your entrepreneurial journey too, where I was just like, yep, went there, did that, learned.
Been through that. I could tell, like, it's nice that we can see each other, because I can see as I'm saying stuff, like nothing threw you off. Probably, if anything, you were just like, gosh, man, I've had all these experiences.
Yeah, I was just checking it off. I was like, oh man, I know what he's been through. Yeah. Yeah. There's a certain camaraderie when you go through those trenches. I mean, in a way, I'm jealous of people who they just start a business and they're successful from day one. But in a way, I'm also like, man, you kind of missed out, like you don't know what it's like to go 4 years without paying yourself and sleeping on the floor and living above a garage and your wife supporting you. Like, you missed out on that. Sorry. Like you just got rich immediately. I feel bad for you. But when you've gone through that.
I think there's a lot to what you're saying, because the thing that has been so incredibly interesting, specifically about the last year, COVID-19, lockdown, like all this stuff, is how effortless gratitude has been and how critical gratitude has been for me thriving in this moment. And it's not a forced gratitude. It's like, I'm literally grateful because I've been through a lot of hardship,
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't trade that for anything,
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to be flush with cash, but at the same time, I'm like, having been through it, I'm grateful for all these experiences because it's taught me something. My family, we read a lot as a family. We're reading a book right now called The Little Princess. Have you ever heard about this one?
Oh, of course.
So I had never heard of it before, but it's like one of those classics, and it's, the girl, she goes from riches to rags and then back to riches. And I'm reading that and I'm like, it's such a great book because it's just that story of, if you've got it all, you don't know what it means to have it all until you lose it. And then you can go back to having it all and you appreciate it. And that gratitude, they say there are all these studies that show that gratitude is the key to happiness. And so if you've never really been without, or you've never experienced what it's like to not have things, it's just harder to be grateful for those things. And then you're robbed of the happiness that comes
That's right.
from that. And so, on the one hand, I'm like, man, I wouldn't wish what I went through on anybody else. But at the same time, like, it's made me a happier, more grateful person for the little things that I do have.
Absolutely.
Anyway. So good to talk with you today, Marcus. Really appreciate this. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to spread the word, please give us a 5-star rating review and tell your friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you listen to podcasts. And if you're an entrepreneur interested in writing and publishing a nonfiction book to grow your business and make an impact, visit publishedauthor.com for show notes for this podcast and other free resources.